All right, welcome everybody who's just joining us. I see a couple people joined in. Welcome to tonight's JUMPinar. Just give us a few minutes while we let others join in, and we'll get started shortly. Hello again to those who just joined us. Just hang in there another minute and a half or so, and we'll get started very shortly. All right. Well, I'm sure more folks will roll in here as we get started, but I'll kick off tonight's session and welcome our guests here, Michael and Edwin. Before I read their formal introductions, I just kind of want to say hi to everybody who's joined us. If this is your first time here for a JUMPinar, these are our Monday night weekly webinar series that we host every week for the past almost 2 years now. We've covered tons of topics in real estate that we don't have the chance to cover in our official training program. So these sort of serve as extracurricular, open to the public courses that we record and have available online. So if you're brand new, welcome, and it's great to have you. And if you've been here before, welcome back. But before we jump into tonight's topic, which I stopped sharing my screen so it's not showing anymore, but it's appraising for commercial real estate. And we've been talking about commercial real estate, instead of residential real estate, which we usually talk about, and talking about the transition and what to expect when you make that transition from that type of development. And commercial real estate appraisals is a particularly important topic that you should be well versed on and understand a little bit. So that's what we're covering tonight. But yeah, before I introduce our guest here and start the conversation, I just want to let Maeva update us on what's going on with the other Jumpstart programs.
Yes, so as you may know, Jumpstart Germantown offers financing for the acquisition and renovation of residential properties in Germantown and other neighborhoods in Philadelphia. It is open to experienced and first-time developers. We'll put the link to the applications and more information on the loan program in the chat, but we are looking forward to seeing your applications.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Maeva. And I think that's all we need to cover. Just a reminder, if you want to ask any questions for Mike and Elvin tonight, you can do so using the Q&A function on Zoom. Just type them in there, and we'll cover them when we wrap up, probably in about half an hour to 45 minutes. But yeah, that's all the housekeeping, and I'll jump in and introduce our guests here. They've been waiting very patiently, so thank you. First, we got Elwin Loud Hammond, and he has worked as a commercial real estate analyst for 10 years for Philadelphia regional real estate appraisal firms. He also has extensive experience as a property manager and has rehabbed residential real estate and he currently works for Higgins and Welch, which is located in Erdenheim, PA, and provides real estate sales, property management, and appraisal services. And our second guest is Michael Cunningham, who is a commercial real estate appraiser with BBG Real Estate Services. And his company provides a full range of real estate consulting services, including appraisals, zoning studies, and property condition assessments. And he is currently the president of the Philadelphia chapter of the American Society of Appraisers and appraises all types of commercial real estate. And of course, Michael and Elwin are local, lifelong Philadelphians, which we love to see. And it's great to have conversations with people who know the area. So, welcome, guys, and thanks so much for joining me tonight. Yeah. All
It's
right.
our pleasure here. It's our pleasure to be here, Derek.
Yeah, great. So just to jump into things, I kind of want to give you guys a chance to say hi and maybe expand upon what you do on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, I understand you both come from real estate appraisal firms in the city. So thank you for dedicating your time to join us tonight. Any additional background you want to give people before we jump into the conversation?
Sure. I grew up in Philly, and I went to local schools. I've been an appraiser for about 15 years. I was a business appraiser for 10 years, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I switched from business appraisals to commercial real estate appraisals. In a lot of ways, they're very similar, but I have a large network among many different types of appraisals in the city. And yeah, I look forward to talking more about the specifics of commercial real estate tonight.
Yeah, and Elwin, you're a real estate developer yourself. You've gotten your hands dirty on some projects.
I have. I've been involved with real estate for quite some time. Even as this, even in my family. So it's just something that I've always been around. I picked up, I guess, more specifically, got more acclimated to commercial real estate, appraising commercial real estate, like I said, about 10 years ago. So I've been doing that, working on projects during that time, property managing, consulting, landlording, things of that nature. But
Awesome.
This is my, I guess, area of biggest area of interest for me. So.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us, and it's really great to have a somewhat experienced developer, someone who understands what a rehab project looks like, and knows the developer and investor side of things. Like I'm not a real estate developer. We're Jumpstart's a lender, so it's cool to talk with people who are boots on the ground actually doing the work. So thanks. Okay, I think to start out the conversation tonight, a good place to begin would be to understand what types of commercial real estate are available for people to develop and create. The distinction here is residential real estate. There's one use. You live there, or there's a house has one purpose, to house people. But when we start talking about more complex types of properties and differently zoned properties, there's some important types people need to know. What can you tell us about that? What should people be aware of when they're looking at property types of commercial real estate?
Well, I think that there are many subspecialties of commercial real estate, but most of the time it's divided into 4 main categories. There's a multifamily, essentially apartments, and then in addition, office, retail, and industrial are the most common types of commercial real estate. And that's generally what we deal with. But I will note there are other types, and they include flex buildings, mixed-use buildings, which are very common in Philadelphia, hospitality, which is essentially hotels, and then there's farms and self-storage facilities and townhouse developments, etc. I will note that the definition of commercial real estate is anything with more than 4 residential units, or anything that has at least 1 commercial unit.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So that's like the clear distinction when you're talking. Okay, is this a residential project or commercial project? Your mind should immediately go to either there's a commercial aspect of the property or 4 more tenants or 4 more units, right?
Yeah, technically it's 5 or more units, because if it's 4 units, if it's a single family, duplex, triplex, or quadruplex, it's still considered residential real estate. Once you get above that, it's considered commercial.
Gotcha. When you're I guess the reason that's important to know the different types is because when you're assessing the value of it, you know, there's the different type weighs into how you're gonna like proceed with that, right? Elvin?
What's that? I'm sorry. You as far as assessing the property?
So I'm sorry. When you're appraising the property, when you're trying to assign value to it, you know, like the type of real estate it is, what its use is pretty important because then you know what to compare it to, right?
Absolutely. So I think that's the most. I think the biggest distinction, and you know, in crossing over, I guess foundationally is to me, I think is risk. So when you're dealing with the difference between residential and commercial, there is a significant level of, there are a lot of underlying factors that make up that that make up the contribute to the risk of the real estate. And those components, most of those components don't exist, or they're significantly less than than when you're dealing with residential real estate. There's less risk involved. Commercial real estate, significantly more risk involved. I guess I'll just start there.
Yeah, no, that's great. It makes sense, and it's especially interesting with commercial real estate. There's a much wider range of kind of like characteristics a property can have. Like I'm thinking, you could say you're developing a commercial property, but it could be multifamily. They're all residential units. You know, that's not too different than managing a triplex or you know, appraising a triplex. But then you have like an industrial use building where it's like a warehouse. You know, they're like, you know, making chemicals or manufacturing something, and it's like totally out of your wheelhouse. So there's a pretty like wide range of you know, area where you can fall in the property type, I guess.
Right, and there's just so many different components to take into consideration when you deal. Like I said, as it pertains to the type, as it pertains to the type of real estate. Residential, you just, you know, if it's a single family, anything like Michael said, less than 4 units, you know, it's pretty straightforward. You're maintaining the property reserves. You know, there's a pretty straight line way of getting to you know, the value. But when you're dealing with commercial real estate, you're taking into account different factors. They become more significant.
Yeah.
So let's keep going and we're going to talk about some of those factors as we move forward. But let's jump into the typical appraisal assignment.
Yeah, and what you mean by that, Michael, is like what when someone, you know, has their property and okay, I need to get this property appraised, what that process is going to look like. That's what we're going to walk through.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, you know, appraisals are done for all types of reasons. But the most 80% of the time, it's because you want to borrow money against the property. So the primary client that we're working with is a bank. We could also be working with lawyers. We could be working with government agencies, but most of the time it's with the bank. And so you're going to go to the bank, and the bank is going to call the appraiser and say, so-and-so wants to get a loan, and we would like to hire you. And this is the property that they want to buy. So the bank is going to tell us about the property. And then basically based on the information that they give us, we're going to tell them, well, this is what it's going to cost. This is how long it's going to take. Typically it takes about a month from start to finish, although it could be 3 to 5 weeks. One of the things that's going to happen during that process is we're going to come to the property. The appraiser is going to send you an information request to help with the appraisal. And based on both the visit to the property and the information that you provide, we'll do the analysis. And then, you know, at the end of 4 weeks, the bank will get the appraisal, and that's kind of the process. Oh, and do you want to jump into like what a typical fee is, and then maybe we can jump into kind of the information request?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
So,
Even if we could just real quick before we talk about the fees,
Sure.
where should people, seek an appraiser? Where do they learn about them? Where do they make that decision? Is that something they should ask fellow developers about? Should they look online?
Uh, you do not actually get to pick your own appraisers. What happens is the lender, uh, for financial reasons, you're not allowed to pick your own appraiser because there could be a conflict of interest.
Mhm.
And it's part of our job as appraisers is to be extremely objective. And so the bank almost has a random drawing process where they can continually cycle through different appraisers in order to make sure that the borrowers don't have relationships with the appraisers, and that's how they kind of keep things objective.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean that makes sense. I think the word conflict of interest is pretty literal there. But you could just say, you have your friend, oh, hey, why don't you do this appraisal for me? And then people start asking questions. So yeah, Elwin, you were about to jump in there.
yeah, I was going to say more specifically, you for financing, you can't pick your own appraiser. Be more specific, but if you wanted to, like say if you had a property that you just wanted to, know what the value of the property was, you can order your own appraisal for that property. It's just not going to be able to, in some cases, depending on relationship, I guess, or whatever. If the bank has a report or a list of appraisers, in some cases they may accept the appraisal. It's not guaranteed,
Right.
but you can order your own appraisal. It's just that it's for financing. They're going to choose. It's more of like a lottery. So now it is. So now that the appraiser winds up getting chosen in that process, and the borrower has no say so in that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, I derailed us a bit, but I think Elwin, you were going to move on to talk about like.
Yeah. So I was going to. So as far as fees are concerned, I'm thinking. Well, I know it residential. The typical fee for a residential job is probably anywhere between $300 and $500, and it's probably on average that's what it is for commercial. And this is dealing with a wide range of types of real estate and assignments. I guess the most of the fees are going to the length of research, depending on the scope of work of the assignment, what it is that goes into the bigger the assignment, the more detailed the research, the bigger the fee. And that usually spans from about like 15 on average. It goes up to, depending on the analysis, from 1,500 to about 3,000, a little bit more, 3,000, 3,500. That's and the turn time is significantly higher too. You're dealing with more of a narrative, appraisal. It's a longer appraisal, because there's more detail that goes into it.
Okay, great.
And also too, the information is, I think Mike was talking about, the information that's requested is very important when you're dealing with that kind of assignment. Getting the more so, I guess, the drawing out the distinction between real residential and commercial. The information that you give the appraiser is essential to the quality of the results, the quality of the end results for the assignment. So anything, if it has to do with the income producing property, income, rent, if you're dealing with development, it has, you want to get any plans and specs to the appraiser, expenses. All of these things can slow the process down if it's not presented in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and I'm sure the more complex your business is, or how you use the property, it's probably a lot easier to explain to an appraiser, or to help an appraiser with how your four unit apartment building works, like how you generate income from that, whether versus like a business or a retail location or even a manufacturer. like you probably got to do a lot to explain to them how you make money and how the property makes like profit, right?
Yes, and also make, just so I'm kind of paying attention to the way that you're describing it. It's
Yep.
also important to understand, because I know some people get it confused, and this is maybe not everyone, but it's important to say that when you're talking about a business, that has nothing to do with the real estate.
Okay.
So if you're talking about, because a lot of people associate storefronts and businesses with the real estate. So, oh, that's the business. No, that's it's you can rent. Most businesses rent space in the real estate. So when we're going in, we're not dealing with business value. We're not dealing with any of that. We're dealing with the rent that business may be paying, or if it's an owner operator, we're dealing with the fact that they may be offsetting their rent to operate their business. But at the end of the day, it's rent for we're dealing with the real estate only. So the rent of the real, not a business, not the business. The business the money that the business generates has nothing to do with the real estate. Separate, it's a separate valuation.
Right.
Just wanted to make that clear.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's definitely a distinction I got to make in my mind. Coming from residential real estate, because you think, oh, I'm the landlord, like I am the business that's on this property, but there's like another level of separation when you're in a commercial real estate, where it's like you as the property owner, making the value or making a profit on the rent that the tenant's giving to you versus the business that's making that money to pay you. So
there you go.
There you go. That's very helpful. Thank you, Ellen.
Yep.
And then I think I don't know if there's anything to wrap up about the information request, but
So I'm just going to run through a couple bullet points just to be a little bit comprehensive. So the information request might include site plans, building plans, unit floor plans, the agreement of sale. If you've come to agreement with the client, the appraiser actually going to, or a seller, the appraiser is going to analyze the agreement of sale to determine, is it an arm's length transaction, and it represents market value. That's one of the things that we're required to do in an appraisal. We also look at current leases. If you sell a property and it's got leases in place, then we're going to have to look at those. They could be below market, they could be at market, they could be above market. We would have the rent roll, like Elvin said, historical operating expenses. And in the case of development, you're going to have to project into the future. So we would look at a projected rent roll and operating expenses. And then one final thing is that it's not always obvious, but let's say you put a new roof on a property in the past couple of years. Well, you should probably tell that to the appraiser, because if you made recent improvement to a particular property, that's going to help us to understand the condition of the property.
Right. And the collection of this information, like, is it back and forth or via email? Do you get like a document you need to fill out with all the information? What does that look like? Like, what's the format that you presented in?
Yeah, typically it's a list that the appraiser is going to send you, and then you can ideally email it to them, because we live in an electronic world. But if you want to mail it to them, I'm sure you can.
Sure, yeah. So, but basically, you just type it up in a comprehensive way or a comprehensible way, so that they just like can read through the fact sheet and they get all. It's not like you have to enter information into a database or anything like that, right?
Absolutely. Well, let's say you got drawings from an architect, where you're going to provide those drawings.
Right.
Or maybe you got a proposed renovation budget from a general contractor. But you don't necessarily have to write up your own budget. You can just provide the budget that the general contractor gave to you.
Right. So you're basically just like relaying all this information that you have to the appraiser and bringing them into the know, catching them up to speed.
Okay. Absolutely.
And it may be a situation where you're doing it twice. A lot of times you're submitting this information to the banks, because obviously, and you should be, giving this information to the banks so that they know what they're lending on. Yeah. So if they're making a decision on lending, you're giving them information about what you're doing, so that you can either, if you're going for refinancing, whatever, they just need to know some details about the property and what's going to happen, if it's something prospective or if it's something current. So if you're not going, if if you're giving them that information, more than likely, just behind the scenes, most of the time, that information always isn't relayed to the appraiser. So you can sometimes expect to give that information twice. So
Right.
it's probably be a good job to be, I guess, kind of organized with the information. Just make sure you have everything together so that it can be sent away. The more you focus on that, the more you're dealing with a process that's, if you're helping the appraiser, you're helping yourself, basically. You're
Yeah.
going to give them information that's going to speed up the process. I mean, everybody, they're not only working on one assignment, they're working on probably multiple assignments.
Yeah.
And the less they have to harass you for information, the easier it is for them to complete the assignment in an efficient way.
Right. And I think that if people in our call are familiar with the Jumpstart loan application and Proforma, we stress the same thing. Is like the more due diligence you do and the more organized you are and the more ready you are with all the information, the quicker you're going to get through that process. So I like that. It's like kind of just the same thing as that you need to prepare for a residential lender, to finance your rehab or your acquisition and rehab of the single family home. Same deal, when it's a 10-unit building, right? You gotta make sure you have all that on hand, so when somebody asks for it, you're ready to go with it.
But with commercial, just probably in some cases it'll probably be just a little bit more.
Oh yeah,
you know yeah.
Sure. Okay, cool. The next thing I see in our agenda here is the different approaches to appraising and different ways to get to that analysis. I think, Elwin, you said the income approach earlier, or maybe it was in our prep call, but one. So maybe we could just break down these three different approaches and explain them to us.
So really quickly, the sales comparison approach is probably the most relevant, the most recognizable to residential, anybody who's dealing with residential real estate. It's just it's comparable data in the market. It's market information, and you're going out and it's essentially finding something that's close, a property it's close to the subject, what we would call the subject, and would be closest to the subject as possible without making significant adjustments, with the location being the primary factor in comparison. And then you just kind of go down the list from there. So you're dealing with, if it's residential and mixed use, I guess the next step up was probably be most relevant. You're basically trying to compare apples to apples, and without going too far away from that. And if you're dealing with a 2-story mixed use building, 3-story mixed use building could work. It could be acceptable, but you're trying to keep it 2-story. You're trying to keep it something as close as possible without varying away from what you're trying to value, what you're trying to establish or create an opinion of value on. That's the sales. Income gets a little bit different, where you're incorporating the money aspect. So you're saying and it's all relevant to. It's not like it's not relevant to residential real estate, but income. The income approach is more of a finite way to arrive at value, especially if the property is income driven. So if you have more than 4 units, 4 or 5 units or 10 units, you're dealing with a property that now you have all these units where before you didn't. If you had a single family, you're dealing with something now, that if all this money factors here and we're collecting rent, this is the most prominent factor in this real estate. So we're going to lean more heavily on this approach. We're going to say income is going to be more of a determinant factor on how we're going to come to arrive at an opinion of value. And then there's a lot of factors that go into that. We're dealing with after the rent, we deduct vacancy. Then after that, we deduct expenses. Then after that, we capitalize those expenses, and with a capitalization rate. That's the income approach. So it captures rent and expenses for the most part. Cost approach, you're dealing with more than likely it's properties that aren't that aren't going to be, that aren't dealing with depreciation, newer properties, and where you're dealing with what the actual cost of the property is, to build. And that's, since it's new, so you're dealing with what it's going to cost you to build it. And that's going to be more relevant to what value would be, since there's, that's what it is. It's going to cost me this to put this property here. So more than likely, that's probably going to be it's going to be closer to what the value is. But and it's all of these approaches can be used, and you just have to, it's at the appraiser's discretion based off of what information is available and the scope of work to determine what approaches are used and what approaches will not be used.
Right. So, and when they present the appraisal to you, and at the end of the process, are they clear about what process they use? Do they say like, okay, we use the income approach for this? I'm just curious, like, is this something that people just need to be aware of, or do they have any sort of like if they get an appraisal that was done with the income approach, would they have any reason to say, okay, I want to go get another one for the cost? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the appraisal in the beginning of the report should detail the scope of work. The appraisal should be very clear about what approaches are being used. That's our due diligence. It's the appraiser's responsibility to make that clear to the reader, what approaches are being used and what approaches are not being used, and what approaches are significant and why they're used. So we have to detail all of those things in the report. That should be made clear to the reader immediately, actually. So in the beginning of the report, somewhere in the beginning of the report, we should be detailing that information to make it obvious to the appraiser. And a lot of time based off of the type of, and Mike can expand on this, how we go about that process.
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that for the most part, and this is, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, what you want to do as an appraiser is you want to mirror the market participant, the investor or the buyer. And the way that most people buy properties is they look at comps and they consider the income that can be derived. So for most appraisals, you're going to use the sales comparison approach and you're going to use the income approach. So you're going to use two approaches, and then, like in some cases, if it's a single tenant industrial building that's highly likely to be used by an owner occupant, the sales comparison approach is really important because the owner occupant is going to go look and buy a similar building. So what they care about is the sales comparison approach. Whereas an investor, let's say it's a mixed-use building on JUMPinar Avenue with 2 residential units on the upper floors and a retail unit on the ground floor, well, that's really an income approach, because what you care about in terms of, I'm going to pay a certain amount and I'm going to spend a certain amount rehabbing it because it's going to be worth X based on the rent and the expenses that I'll have once it's rehabbed.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's kind of like the appraiser is just trying to use these formulas in the best way, like you said, to mirror what the investor is doing. So you want to make your decisions as an appraiser the same way you would expect an investor to, right?
Absolutely. And I think I like to say that the job of an appraiser is to look at a property from the perspective of a buyer. Now that buyer could be a variety of different, it could be an investor, it could be an owner occupant, it could be a tenant, it could be somebody else who is using the property. So, the appraiser's job is to look at the property from the perspective of a buyer.
Great. Cool. And the next little thing we have here is on variable or key variables in the selection of comparable sales comps or comparable sales. So I just wanted to say I like that you're or at least I think that people in the call are familiar with the sales comparison approach, and that's how we look at all of our loans that we get, our loan applications that we get. The first thing usually every time the discussion begins at the comps. You look at them and you say, oh well, here's this property that sold for this much more, so that means this, and that's kind of where the discussion is focused. Obviously, when you start to bring in other approaches like the income approach and cost approach, there's a lot more variables that come in, and those comps become less important. But it seems like here you've looked at a lot of things that are characteristics of properties that you should look out for, regardless of what approach you're looking at, right?
Absolutely. And is there any way I can share my screen, or should I just keep going?
Yeah, no, go ahead, go for it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good. I can also share. I have mine up too if you want me to do it. Oh, you got it. You're good.
So you can see it?
Yep.
So, oops. So
Okay.
just sometimes this is a list of some of the key variables in selection of comparable sales. I'll go down the list, but the first, of course, is the type of property. We talked about the many different types of commercial properties, but that's really the number one factor in the selection of comparable sales. Other factors that can affect value include location, the exposure, the condition of the property, the functionality, what are people going to do with this particular property, the unit mix, the size, the number of potential tenants or units, and then, in some cases, maybe the size of, the amount of open land or the size of the site. Owen, do you want to talk a little bit about location and how that impacts value?
Sure. From a locational standpoint, as it pertains to what we call the subject property, so that, location in general, I think we all get an idea of when you're selecting properties where you want to be, or all of these things, not where you want to be or where you want to select your property to purchase, or to where your interest is, and that is solely based on the buyer. But as it pertains to the real estate that you do select, the comparable sales that you choose are important, to be as close as possible to the subject, especially one that's we select a few. Most of the time we're selecting either 3 or 4 comparable sales, and the reason why we select those, the amount of sales, so we can get we have a wider range, or wider a bigger pool to choose from, or to establish a range from. So and that's exactly what we're doing. We're establishing a range based off of the sales that we use and these characteristics, are usually adjusted based off of what the significance is to the subject. So if it's the comparable sales are in close proximity to the subject, then you're going to have minimal adjustments. If they're further away, then you're going to have, maybe a significantly, different or higher, more adjustments. But also too, what's important with commercial real estate is exposure. So exposure kind of dictates, not so much as residential real estate, but the exposure is important, because that's where, if you're getting a tenant that is a retail tenant, it's if he has a location on a heavily trafficked thoroughfare, in a dense neighborhood, and it's a corner location, then that may be more desirable than a commercial property on a one-way street, on a one-way side street. So those aspects of commercial real estate, those, and Mike has them listed in to what I see order of importance, because that's exact for commercial real estate. It's a very important factor. Condition obviously is it is what it is. What is the condition of the unit, the subject, when you're comparing it to other sales? Functionality, unit mix, that's a big thing too, because if you have, with unit mix for a mixed use property, we have the units of comparison may change in commercial real estate too. So we value things on a price, mainly on a price per unit or a price per square foot basis. And most of the time when it's on a price per unit, you're dealing with comparable units. With mixed use buildings, you're more than likely going to compare on a price per square foot basis, and there are exceptions, but most of the time they're price per square foot because the unit it's mixed use. So the two uses are different, and it's hard to, and most of the time they'll have two different ways of units of comparison. And that's why the most generals will be based on a price per square foot. And then the size. So the size, you make adjustments for size, number of potential tenants and units. All these things are adjusted on a sales grid, a sales comparison grid. And then a range is established, and it's at the appraisers, based off the information that was researched and his expertise. That's where he or she would pick the range, pick a place on the range, more than likely, and establish that as what the value is for that, for this section, for the sales comparison approach.
Right. And I want to do a quick time check real quick. We'll talk for maybe 5-10 more minutes, and then we'll leave a little bit of extra time on the end for Q&A. But I did have a follow-up question about these comparable or these variables, and when you're selecting a comparable sale, what matters. What service are you using to look for comparable sales? Is there like a separate MLS service for commercial real estate, or is it the same? Are they mixed in? Or I'm just wondering, where are like people familiar with residential comps would be looking on Zillow and Redfin, but obviously you're not going to use those in a professional appraisal. Where are you using to look for sales comps?
Did you want to go, Mike?
The largest database is that's available to appraisers. It's called CoStar.
CoStar.
But I will note that it really depends on the type of property that you're looking at. If you're looking at a smaller apartment building, or you're looking at a mixed-use building, they are frequently in the multiple listing service.
Right.
The other thing that there's a website called LoopNet, and that kind of the public-facing version of CoStar, where a lot of people who have properties for sale will list them. So, LoopNet and the multiple listing services would actually be the places to start. And then if you need additional feedback, you probably want to actually reach out to a commercial broker to help you do some research.
Great. Yeah, that answers my question. Thanks, Mike. Okay, I see you have some pictures on the next slides here.
I do. I thought it would be good if we could discuss a little bit of stories, right? Make it. So what we're looking at is a one-story retail building, and this is actually located at Oak Lane and Cheltenham Avenue in East Oak Lane. And this building has been vacant for 10 years. I grew up in this neighborhood, so it annoys me all the time. But the question is, what's going on with this particular property? And if you're familiar with Cheltenham Avenue, and City Line Avenue has the same kind of, I don't know what you call it, but
aesthetic.
The side on the city is less desirable for many people than the side on the suburbs, right? And the primary reason for that is because you don't pay sales taxes if you're on the suburban side of the city border. And that doesn't matter for everybody, right? But if you are selling, say, alcohol or cigarettes, do you want to be on the city side of the street, or do you want to be on the suburban side of the street? You save 2%. And so that is one factor that is contributing to this particular property kind of being vacant and abandoned. Now, I do want to focus on a couple other things about this property. This property has excellent exposure. It's on Cheltenham Avenue, which has a high traffic value. And there's really no reason that this property should be vacant, because there's cars driving by it all the time. So exposure basically means Are there pedestrians walking past it, or there vehicles driving by it? And that's one factor that influences value.
Yeah.
You know, a property that's on, say, Germantown Avenue is going to be what that's a commercial building. It's probably with the retail unit, it's going to be worth more than a property that's, say, on Wayne Avenue, which doesn't have quite the traffic that Germantown Avenue has.
Mhm.
And so, getting back to taxes, some people say that this property, because it's in the city, might have locational obsolescence because you have to pay tax. You know, the user has to pay more in sales taxes.
Mhm.
But I would argue that what's really going on is maybe this property has bad management. Management is a key factor in value, and our job is to say, you know, maybe the problem with this property isn't the location or maybe the property is the owner got lazy, wasn't paying attention, wasn't doing the proper marketing,
Mhm.
and it's just letting it sit there. So that's just some kind of,
Yeah.
Elwin, you have anything to add on that property?
No, I think that's, you just went into more detail about when I was talking about, the factors of the factors in the sales
And
comparison
so
approach.
the last thing I would say is that there are tenants for this particular building that I think that a good manager would look for, and or a good landlord. You know, if you're a cell phone store or you're a daycare, it doesn't really matter that you're in the city. Number one, because there's plenty of customers who don't care about the fact that they're going to pay 2% more for a service, and so I think that this is definitely a case where management played a big role in it kind of being boarded up, and that's not really a reflection of the location. And I would argue that in the city of Philadelphia, we're not in the middle of nowhere. I've done appraisals of properties that are at the end of a highway, an hour and a half from Philadelphia, where there's no very low residential density in every direction. And I can understand why there might be an obsolete property. But in the city of Philadelphia, there's no, in my own opinion, there's no reason why a property should ever look like this in this blighted condition.
I think we're in a good
So,
That's
so when,
yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just strongly agreeing with Mike. It's crazy. Like even this picture you're showing, it's a great opportunity that's just right there. Yeah.
And yes, and Mike is right. But there's another thing. I don't know if I know we didn't mention it, but and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But this is an important factor. One of the most, I would say, the most important factor in I guess in any real estate is determining what the best use of the property is, and the highest and best use of the property is what's most maximally productive for the property. This property here could be a clear case of maybe it may be being underutilized due to management, but an appraiser's job is to make sure that the property is being utilized to its fullest potential, regardless, and incorporating all of the uses. So taking into consideration all of the uses that are available to be, in this site, whether it be zoning, like I said, the type of real estate, all of these things come and play a major factor in determining, what the highest and best use of the properties. That's the most important thing. And there are 4 components to that: physically feasible, legally permissible, financially feasible, and maximally productive. Those things all of those things have to be addressed, and have to be addressed, and have to be integrated into the appraiser's opinion of value. And they can't fall short of, none of those factors can fall short of a highest and best use test. They all need to essentially pass the test, so that we can determine whether or not this building here, you know, this improvement needs to be here. That's the appraiser's job.
Great. Great. I don't mean to rush you through, but maybe we could just
Okay.
do a little speed run of these last slides we have here, and then because there's some great questions I want to make sure we get to. But yeah, go right ahead.
I just have two quick stories.
Mhm.
This is an old firehouse in Delaware County, and the borough is no longer using it as a firehouse. And so the question is, what is it? And if you look at it from a functional perspective, it's an industrial flex building. What that means is that flex basically means that you could use it in a couple of different ways. And typically it's either storage or office space. And on the ground floor, we have a garage, it's essentially storage. And on the upstairs, we have offices. It used to be, you know, the firemen used to sleep there at nighttime. And but the problem is that as an industrial flex building, the modern users really want open space because they want, you know, the tractor trailer to be able to come in and make deliveries and pick stuff up. And this space actually this building, this old firehouse, has no parking on site, and there's no space. So the buyer actually came along and he convinced the city council to allow him, well, actually this was in a walkable neighborhood and it was zoned for commercial mixed use. And he said, I want to put a coffee roastery in here. And they said, well, it's not zoned for industrial use. They said, as long as you put a coffee shop in the front, you can put your coffee roastery in the back.
Mhm.
And and the thing is that right now, industrial properties are very expensive. Think of Amazon. Everybody, there's so much logistics, and so if you go out into Delaware County and a place where there's open space, you're going to pay a lot of money for an industrial building. And this buyer essentially found another building that was not usable for modern industrial users, and he's going to use it for a mixed use and basically maximize its profit potential. And everybody gets to be better off because of that.
Right. Cool. Cool. Yeah, that's a cool example. Thank you.
And then I'm going to let Elwin close off here, but you know, Philadelphia has all these commercial corridors. We have, you know, businesses throughout the entire city: Germantown Avenue, Grant Avenue, the Roosevelt Boulevard, 52nd Street in West Philly, and 9th Street in South Philly, Market Street, Chestnut Street, Rocket Street. We just have a surplus of commercial neighborhood corridors where they provide amenities to the neighborhoods and jobs. And as a result, Philadelphia has a lot of commercial mixed-use buildings. So I'm going to let Elwin close off with talking about kind of what contributes to this, you know, commercial mixed-use building on Germantown Avenue.
So as far as this, I think this is one of yours, right, Mike?
It's not. It's just a random commercial building.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can talk about it. It's basically
No. I got it.
Yeah.
So at as far as you know, I guess this one is 2 units. Let's see, retail. Okay, so this mixed use building is located on a corner. I'm not sure what corner. What corner is this, Mike?
I don't know, but it's somewhere in the middle of Germantown on Germantown Avenue.
So it's along Germantown Avenue, but there's a few things that are significant and what you want to pay attention to when you're dealing with a mixed-use property like this. First thing is, and these things impact value. So the separation of, like, if the property is separately metered, meaning that are the meters ran individually for each unit. Depending, it could be 3, 4, 5 units. But if they are run individually, that's a significant, you know, that's a plus for an owner. If you're looking into commercial, if you're looking for a mixed use building, you're looking to have the cost deferred to the tenant. So the more of the costs that are deferred, and that's the first thing is how the layout of the property. That's the most significant factor. The layout of it, the utilization of it.
Elwin, let me just clarify what you were saying about the meters. If there's, say 3 separate meters going to each 3 unit, do you mean if there was, say, only 1 meter or only one way to like monitor the power for each, like you wouldn't be able to evenly like break up what each tenant owes, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and as far as value is concerned, people have their ways of getting around it. But as far as value is concerned, when we go into a property and we don't see meters, it doesn't really, it's not, the typical purchaser isn't going to go in and, have a way to break it up. You can't really determine if they're not, who's paying what if they're not separate meters.
So that's kind of, it's signaling to the potential developer or borrower saying like, hey, this is all set up for you to go. It's less work that you need to do to like separate those meters, right?
Right, but that also impacts the expenses. So if you have your expenses that you pay for a property like that, so if it's separately metered, you're not going to factor in, you're on an income sheet, which is something that we didn't really get into, but for an income analysis in the income approach, you're going to factor those things in. So if it's not separately metered, there's going to be a significant utility expense. If it is, then it's going to be marginal. Most of the time, if it's, especially for electric, if it's separately metered for electric, the owner is going to pay for the house meter. But if it's not, then it's going to, you're going to absorb, on paper, you're going to absorb the cost for the whole utility bill, because there's no way for you to determine who's paying what. That goes for gas and electric, and the only really expense that the typical expense, utility expense that an owner or landlord pays is the water. So the water sewer expense, because, even though a lot of water meters are sub-metered, especially in the city of Philadelphia, it's more complicated to have that process done. So it's more than likely the owner is going to absorb that cost. Those when you're doing an income analysis, these factors, the management, that's another factor where Mike was talking about. If it's poorly managed, we're going to, it's a more of a risk. So that management fee may be higher, right? So we're going to take those things into consideration. If it's in less, if the condition isn't that, and if it's not in good condition, or if the utilities aren't up to date, you're going to probably we have in a section called the reserves for replacement. That number may be higher, right? So, if it's a newer building, it'll probably be lower because the utilities will have a longer a life, right? So it's not going to be as impactful. It'll be impactful in a positive way, but if the life of these utilities are older, it can impact in a negative way, meaning you're going to hold more in reserves to capture, to make sure that if something happens, you're able to fix it. But these are the things that the bank is looking at to make sure that that's where the risk comes in. That's what I was talking about, risk earlier. Yeah. These are things that, this is how a bank this is actually the best way for a bank to determine visually what the risk is, as opposed to looking at a market, approach. They're looking at an income approach, and they're saying, okay, based on analysis and these numbers, this is reflecting what the actual risk is in dollars and cents. You can see it more clearly based off of, market analytics and market research. So those are the factors. So just because you have a storefront on Germantown Avenue doesn't necessarily mean you have, it's going to be something viable. It doesn't mean it's going to be something, good, or it's going to be something that you can, but it's all about how, like Mike said, is how you manage it, the condition of the property, the layout of the property, the exposure, all of these things together, all of these things combined, that's what we as appraisers are looking at. We're not looking at one thing and excluding the other, right? And we're also looking at what determines the rent. So
Derek, why don't we do Q&A and see how we we could talk for hours and hours.
Sure.
So why don't we try to answer the questions, and if there's more time, we'll circle back.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Elwin, thank you for the answer there and explaining my question about the meter breakdown. But I just want to say before we jump into the questions here, Michael and Elwin, thank you so much. This was really, really great. Definitely, I learned a lot, and I hopefully the 10 folks joining us and the people watching the recording will as well. Let's jump into some of these questions before we close out. The first one comes from Kimberly, and she's wondering, in an Airbnb, is that income evaluated in a commercial property? So if they have a CMX zoned property and they're using part of it as an Airbnb, is that calculatable income?
Alvin, I'm going to let you answer that since you're the Airbnb expert.
So I'm not an Airbnb expert, but in the properties that I did appraise, because I did do a couple. So they are significantly different, and there's no real way. There's the comparisons. There's no real way to grab Airbnb rentals that's readily available to appraisers. So what we usually do is break them down on a per unit basis, and for the most part, we're in most instances we're grabbing rent from the higher end of the range because of the level of maintenance that's involved in Airbnb rentals. So they're usually maintained very well. They have to be. There's a standard that's available that needs to be had in order for for you to make a determination of how to but it helps you make a determination on how to go about
So I just want to add one thing.
Yeah.
And that is that I apologize for interrupting. The most important determinant when you're looking at Airbnb rents is, do you have a 2 or 3 year history? If you have a history and you can prove that you've been generating income, then the appraiser can probably rely on that. But if you've only had the Airbnb for say 3 months or 6 months, the bank's not going to really want to hear the appraiser say that you have that's an indication of a sustainable, rental property. You know what I'm saying? And so, the whole questions with Airbnbs is, do you have a history or not? If you're just getting it off the ground, the appraiser, like Elwin and I, is going to essentially look at that as a regular building and say, what's the market rate to rent that on a regular, if it's a regular 1 bedroom, because we don't have a history of, and we can't prove that it can be an Airbnb.
And that's I'm glad you said that, Mike, because he's absolutely 100% correct. But the significance about that too, what Mike just explained to you, everything he just said can be summed up in 2 words: managing risk. So that's really what it really is. As far as Airbnb is concerned, that is the way the bank is determining how to manage risk and how they're going to determine what they're lending. But it's up to us to present that information. And if, like Mike said, the way they're determining that risk is, if it's sustainable, have you had success sustaining this kind of rent, getting this kind of rent for 2-3 years, and then you can probably use that rent and then apply that to make it applicable to value.
Right. Okay, great. Our next question, or next 2 questions, come from Keith, and he heard that monthly rent should equal 1% of property value. Is that a good way to guess commercial real estate appraisals? Is that a good way to guess a commercial appraisal during due diligence? So they're estimating rents as 1% of property value. How do you guys feel about that?
I would.
General, right?
I wouldn't look at it that way because there's so many other variables that come into play. That because if you were just by going through this conversation, you can see all of the things that that go into determining value. And those, you can have rent, and the rent is what it is. but there's other things that can fluctuate. You have expenses that could be, that go up and down. You have, like I said, you can have a building that has, be fully separately metered, and you have one that's not. The condition could be low. All of those factors play into they factor into the net operating income, determining the net operating income, and essentially, getting to the value. So I don't know, maybe Mike can expand a little bit.
I think that's what would be considered a rule of thumb. And appraisers generally do not rely upon rules of thumb. There may be cases where it happens to work out, but I've never actually heard that particular rule of thumb, and I would not rely upon that rule of thumb.
Great. Well, and his next question is about the sales comparison approach. How many months in the past do you look, and how many miles away? What's the range, both time wise and distance wise, that you should be looking in for comps?
So it's generally what would be the effective date of the appraisal. That's when the appraiser actually viewed the property, went out and observed the property. So we would establish that as the effective date, and then we would count 3 years prior to that. So it's not much. It's 36 months, I would guess, prior to that effective date. All the comps would be relevant, based on, and also too, the older they get, still you want to factor in market conditions too, because then you're going into potentially, you're still gauging the market during that time period. It could be 3 years, but we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and the height of that was in 2020. So you're still, we're still figuring out how to, detail those, as that has to be incorporated, but it just gives you an idea of, how that timeline is worked out. But since commercial real estate isn't traded as, frequently as residential real estate, the time is expanded significantly. So
that's what I was going to say, because the guidelines we give borrowers are 1 year back and 1 mile radius, but clearly like you just said, the frequency of the amount that properties are exchanged is much different in commercial real estate, so you can't really constrict with that.
In terms of location, it really depends on the property type and if you can find comp close by. On Germantown Avenue, you could probably find mixed-use properties within a half a mile. Mm-hmm. But if it's a unique property that doesn't trade very often, I might have to use all of Northeast Philly, or I may have to maybe some of the comps on Germantown Avenue and some I don't know, consider some, maybe I know Northeast Philly better, so I just think like Grant Avenue, or so you might just have to expand the location, is what I'm saying.
Great. Cool. And we got just 2 more questions left, and we'll wrap up tonight. The next one comes from Brian, and he was wondering, this is a good question, what software do you recommend to access information, other than MLS or LoopNet, which gives a variety of, what software do you recommend to access information other than from the MLS and LoopNet, where you can find cap rate info, expense ratios, expense averages, property class, and sales prices? Basically just looking for information when gathering, or seeing how they can gather more information when analyzing commercial properties that are 5 units or more. So maybe they're just looking for resources to find data about properties, in this scale.
CoStar, just like Mike said. So that's what for the most part, that's what we use. We use CoStar for commercial real estate. Typically, that's what most commercial real estate appraisers use. It's a paid subscription. It's not cheap either.
Right. Okay, great. And then the last question we have tonight is from Kimberly Ryan. She's wondering, I've seen single-family homes zoned for industrial. This might be a little off topic, but can an industrial zoned property be a single-family home? What are the dynamics at play there?
I guess it depends on the current zoning. There's a lot of variables. But there's something called adaptive reuse, right? And sometimes there's a garage that somebody converted into a single family, residence, and it's something they just decided to do on a whim, and it has nothing to do with whether it's the best use of the property. On the other hand, it could be zoned. A lot of the older industrial buildings in, say, Kensington and Germantown are now actually zoned for industrial mixed use or industrial residential use or commercial use. I think it would have to be a very small property for it to be single family, but I wouldn't be surprised if it could be used residentially.
It's sort of a broader discussion about the way Philly zoning is kind of mixed matched all over the city, and some ones that raise your eyebrows at, you're like, why is it like that, right? But yeah, I like your answer, Mike, and it's that there's a lot of factors, a lot of variables that can go into it, like we discussed tonight. Okay, great. Well, like Michael has up on the page there's our contact information for Elwin and Mike. Thank you again, guys.
That would be, just correction, my email address will be welshgroup.net.
Okay. Welch, I think I got an email shot back from you the other day.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that, Elwin.
No, it's okay. It's all right.
Let me, I'm just going to type it in chat just so people have it. Welchgroup.net, you said?
Yeah, believe so.
So, Derek, I'm going to fix the official slide and we'll send it to you. If you want to distribute to anybody, you can.
Yeah.
Elwin and I are completely available to answer questions anytime. And, we love Jumpstart Germantown, and we think you guys are doing good work, and we wish you a lot of luck. And we hope you rehab a lot of houses and commercial properties.
Great. Thank you, Michael. We're well on our way, and hopefully some people in the call are participating in that. Let me just real quick before we stop, I know we're way over time here. I just want to remind everybody what we have coming up. Next week, we are taking the week off for the Thanksgiving holiday, but the following week, we'll be back with Ryan Spack, who is a friend of Philly Office Retail's president, Ken Weinstein, and a commercial developer here in Germantown. So we're going to be doing a sort of a case study discussion about his mixed-use development project at 500 South 52nd. There's a fallacy on this JUMPinar upcoming sheet. There's the December 6th one is not taking place. Bridget couldn't make it, so we'll either have off that week or we're going to find another topic. But go ahead and register for all those at jumpstartgermantown.com/events. As I mentioned earlier, we record all of these and have them available online, so you can go to jumpstartgermantown.com/JUMPinars, or you can see the podcast version if you want to hear the audio only. I don't know why it's not coming up on my screen here, but that's at jumpstartgermantown.com/media, and that'll be up by the end of the week. All right. Well, I think that does it. Thank you one last time, Michael and Elwin. Really appreciate it. And I'll be sure to send out the information to everybody once you get those slides back to me. I'm sure everybody's looking forward to seeing them. All right.
Good. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. You guys have a good night.
You too. Thank you.